Hello and aloha. Welcome to History 241, Civilizations of Asia. Today we were going to be going into session 19 that deals with the Sui and the Tang dynasty, roughly from about 589 to 907 AD. So let's see, first of all, please check your web city and check for the assignments of any schedules that you need to pick up. And also please note down my email address and the phone number. My name is Abdul Karim Khan. There will be a couple of times Khan mentioned in this presentation. Don't confuse it with me. Those are different people. I teach here at Leeward Community College, and on your web CT, the schedule, there is the latest phone number and the email address, and please use them and call me or contact me anytime you want to or you need to, and I will try my best to get back to you. So before we get into the Sui and the Tang dynasty, let's see what we did last time. Just a review of the previous session. That was session 18, and this is session 19. Last time we talked about the former Han dynasty and how legalism was used first by the Qin dynasty, and then the Han dynasty continued that legalist philosophy, and it worked for the Han dynasty. So almost like two dynasties using the same philosophy. Emperor Wudi, the founding foundation that the Han dynasty got from him, we talked about him also. Later on, because the former Han, the Han people that were living in the West, they were kicked out of that place, and so that's why the former Han, we said, they are also known as the Western Han. The later Han, because they moved the capital to east, that's why they are also called the Eastern Han. Just to remind you, the direction, the Western Han was the former Han, the Eastern Han was the later Han. And then at the end of the Han dynasty, how China again became divided into three kingdoms. We talked about the three kingdoms, and that was almost the end of the Han dynasty, and somebody had to come and restore again the dynastic cycle to China and restore peace and restore order as well as civilization back to China. So what you will be seeing in the next session, also session 19, that deals with the Sui and the Tang dynasty, almost the same problems in the sense that keep in mind the cycle of the dynasties. That dynasty would change and follow each other, and in a cycle in which the first there would be a great dynasty that would work forever, like 200 years and 300 years, and finally it would come to an end because of either the internal problems or because of the external forces, that is the invasions of the Turks or the Mongols or somebody else, and so they would create problems for the dynasty, and the dynasty would of course go down and would lose power, and somebody else would come and reunite China and restore peace, and again another great dynasty to China. And so that is how the history of China worked. And so you would see it from now onward as we progressed, all these sessions from the Qin dynasty to the Han, and from the Han to the Sui and the Tang, and moving on to the Song and the later on the Ming and the Qing dynasties that we would see maybe in History 242. So let's see, today we are going to talk about the Sui dynasty and the Tang dynasty. The Sui dynasty, it unified China because it wiped out all those warring kingdoms, or the three kingdoms. So the unification under China under the Sui dynasty and the restoration of order and peace. But then the Sui dynasty had to deal with the problems with Korea. And so the Sui dynasty got into these wars against Korea, and that was just a big disaster for the Sui dynasty, and that's how the Sui dynasty lost its power, again due to problems from the outside. That led to the rise of the Tang dynasty. And this is the most celebrated dynasty in the history of China. But unfortunately, Tang dynasty would also lose its power to foreign invasions and internal problems. And there would be barbarians invading, China. And then we would talk about, the Tang culture, how strong, wonderful this dynasty was, and till, the end of China. You would see what established Tang as culture, as civilization in China that would be continued. Of course, every dynasty that would come later on would add something to it. Tang dynasty also lived forever or ruled forever. And it was the dynasty of 20 emperors, was some, short-lived, some long-lived, 20 emperors, 20 kings. And it established a lot of culture, a lot of civilization in China, a lot of agriculture, a lot of commerce and trade, not only inside China, but also outside China. So today we would focus on the Sui dynasty and later on the Tang dynasty in session 19. So let's see. Between the Han and the Sui dynasty, the end of the Han dynasty left China divided, as I said, and the rise of the three kingdoms further divided China into pieces. These three kingdoms, each one looked like itself like a big empire, or it was just about to go and take the other kingdoms. So that's how China was left into big divisions, big problems. So anytime China is divided between kingdoms, that was not good, which meant a lot of warfare. So these three kingdoms were the Wei kingdom, the Shu kingdom, and the Wu kingdom. Not only these three kingdoms, but also another dynasty that came after Han and before the Sui dynasty was the Jin dynasty, the Western Jin and the Eastern Jin dynasty. So there were too much going on after the end of the Han. The Han also, they ruled forever. They ruled for a long time. So that's why after the Han dynasty, unfortunately, you see again the breaking up of China into pieces, into kingdoms, and that China would suffer. Amazingly, during these three kingdoms also, although they were fighting among themselves, but so far the people were concerned. In each kingdom, the Wei, the Shu, and the Wu, they went on with their life. They produced whatever they needed to, and each one focused on themselves in terms of the production, agriculture production, the commercial or the industrial production that went on in China. So although the kingdoms, when China was divided in kingdoms and there was fighting among these kingdoms, still life went on. And unfortunately, a lot of people, got killed. But those who were experts, skilled people, they remained in their skills and in their production. Peasants suffered the most because sometimes these peasants would, in peacetime they would be agriculture workers, peasants, farmers. But in wartime, they would be turned into soldiers. They would be drafted, conscripted, able-bodied young men would be drafted or conscripted in Chinese army, and they would be asked to go and fight. Some of them would be, of course, trained, some of them won't be trained. So agriculture would suffer, but at the same time, other skill, non-agriculture skills, commercial production of items like the jade, the silk, the porcelain, that went on. Although it would suffer, but still technology continued, and it went on, the production went on, maybe sometime on commercial and industrial level. So let's see further. After these kingdoms came into being, one of them, the Wei people, especially the northern Wei, their rulers, they dominated northern China. And northern China, as you might know, much more closer to Mongol China, or the Mongol people in the north. They were a little bit better off in terms of the defense, in terms of the strategic skills that they had learned, because they had been fighting, the northern barbarians or the Mongols, so that's why they were in better position to conquer other nations. And as you might have noticed in the history of China, that it's always the northern people, always the northern dynasties or the northern kingdoms that would come and take over the central and the southern kingdoms. Hardly ever any southern people went and grabbed or conquered the northern people. It's most of these invasions, as you would notice in the history of China, and not only in the history of China, even in Roman Empire, the troubles came from the north. because northern people, they were tough people. They lived in the mountains. They could survive and cope with hardships. So that's why again and again the northern people would come and take over the people in central China as well as in southern China. So I just wanted to mention that why all these invasions coming from the north, and most probably also the northern people, hungry people, not much having enough to eat. They wanted the good life of the center and the south of China. So that's why they would come and invade. Rich people never felt the need to go and attack a place that did not produce any food. It was always the reverse. So that's the reason with the northern Wei people that they dominated entire China. Let's see further. They dominated entire China. Now the Wei people, these were Mongolite Turks or Turkish Mongols, or a mixture of the Chinese, the Mongol, and the Turkic people. They adopted Chinese language. They adopted Chinese dress. Their surnames, they could speak Chinese language because they had to deal with Chinese. Some of them were also mixed with the Korean people in the northeast of China. So the northern Wei people, they dominated northern China. So for their ethnicity was concerned, a mixed group of people of the Chinese, the Mongol, and the Turkish people. They could speak Chinese language. They could dress like the Chinese. They adopted also Chinese surnames because they had to deal with the Chinese. They moved the capital to Luoyang, again further east. And that gave them a sort of, and you would see this moving of the capital back and forth much more for defense purposes. If the eastern part of the Wei River became threatened, they would move further west to Luoyang, and then from Luoyang to Chang'an in the east. So that's how the movement of the capital you would see a lot more in China than in Roman Empire or any other place. In the Roman Empire also around 300 years, after Christ, there too the capital was moved from Rome, which was the original capital, to another place in Greece called Byzantium, that later on would be known as Constantinople, because King Constantine moved the capital there. And it was all for strategic purposes, for defense purposes, and to keep the dynasty or the power going on and continued. So this was also the same reason in Chinese history, the movement of capital to a safer place from Luoyang to Chang'an, and from Chang'an back to Luoyang. Let's see further. So the northern people, they came into power, especially under Wendi, the ruler of the northern Wei people. They came to power, dominated most of North China, and they conquered, as I said, northern China. And he founded his own dynasty, the Sui dynasty, this Wendi. So he would be the first Sui dynasty person. And you would see, although it did not work for a long time, but still the foundation by the first emperor was a strong foundation that could go on. Emperor Wendi, he was the first Sui emperor. As I said, he unified entire China. That he had to do, otherwise he could not become the emperor of China. He had to bring everybody under his control. To control the Mongols, he rebuilt the Great Wall that had been, for about more than 300 years in disrepairs. So he had to rebuild it. That was good for the protection of the empire and the Sui dynasty. He also constructed the Grand Canal. Some of this, in pieces and bits, the Grand Canal pre-existed, but he connected the dots. And so that's why he's given the credit for the construction of the Grand Canal. So that made agriculture, better in the area. Through the canal, he linked the Yellow River in the northern area with the Yangtze River in the southern area. So that is how he connected the two regions and used the resources of South China. Now, South China, as you already know, it's much more a better place so far agriculture is concerned. And the reason for that is it's a little bit temperate environment as compared to North China, which is very continental, tough terrain, and lack of water and lack of rain in the north. That's why only wheat and barley could grow. but in the south, much more water, softer soil. And that's where Chinese, till this day, they grow more and more rice. So this area, the south area, was rich. So for natural resources were concerned, more people lived in the south. So for the manual, and population resources were concerned, and that was very, smart on part of Emperor Wendi to connect the northern region with the southern region, that is the Yellow River with the Yangtze River, through this great canal. I've read somewhere that it's about 1,200 miles long canal, and it's a long, long canal. And he could do it because he had the resources. He could, use the army that was not fighting at that time, because he had, overpowered everybody. So he had imposed sort of a peace, and now he could use the army in the construction of this 1,200-mile long great grand canal. And it is still there, and Chinese people, they use it for different purposes. It's also navigable. You can do a lot of navigation from north to south. So that's also good for taking commodities from north to south, back and forth. Let's see, I think we have a picture there. This is the Grand Canal, but now, they're modern, sort of, not so modern. This is, I believe, taken somewhere in 19th century. In the 1800s. It's a bit old picture, but still not as old as the canal itself. So that's, I think, the only picture that I could find. Okay, let's move on. Then Wendi was replaced by another great emperor, however, with a lot of problem, and that would be Emperor Yang Di. The second Sui emperor did not rule for long. He was just the opposite of his father, in the sense that his father was a very smart person. He was a very capable person. He had, the confidence of the army, the generals, because most of them, the Emperor Wendi and these military officers that he had from the Wei family, they had been fighting together, and they had been together in a lot of trouble. So that's why there was a good connection. But the army general, the officers of Wendi's army, did not connect with his son Yang Di. So that's why he was the opposite, and in temperament and lifestyle he was also the opposite of his father. Emperor Yang Di, he was not a good administrator, just as his father was, and so he imposed more taxes upon people, which his father did not like, but he could not stop them, of course. Nobody could stop them. And he empties the treasury in his luxurious lifestyle. His father had made a big treasury, he had filled the treasury, and through peace and prosperity of the region. But when Yang Di became the emperor, he adopted a very luxurious lifestyle, and that, of course, emptied the treasury, for which he had to pay. Not only he himself, but the entire Sui dynasty had to pay. Also, he had quite a few concubines, which was not really new or not abnormal for him to have concubines. And you would see the use of concubines again and again, in Chinese dynasties, and different emperors had, these were very polygamous people. They had multiple wives, but at the same time multiple, concubines. And some of them would be like, 50, 40, a lot of women. And they married them for different reasons. One could be beauty, that, a king liked someone and so he wanted to marry her or have her in his harem anyway. So that was one, the like for a woman, because, the poor woman happened to be beautiful. And that's why the emperor wanted her, whether she liked it or not. She had to join the harem, and even if he never had the time to see her. That was one. The second thing was, second reason for polygamy in China, and for that reason in other places in the world, in world history, was that these women came from powerful families, powerful tribes, that the emperor wanted to connect with those tribes and families, so he had to marry one of them. And that was like making a good connection with the family or the tribe or the clan that would not rise against him because he married, their daughter. So that's why, the different emperors ended. But here, Yang Di, and he would not be the last one. They just went too much, for too many concubines, and that created problem. Each one, a lot of them would have their sons, and they wanted to bring, their respective son on the throne. So that created problem at the end of the emperor's life. Even before his death, there started these intrigues among these powerful women, and each one wanted, as I said, their son to become the next emperor, and that's how violence would start within the family. Okay, let's see. So he had several concubines, Yang Di, and he asked Hua Mulan. Yes, Mulan, the one that you might have watched in the movie. Now here, this particular person by the name Mulan, she is not just only in the 6th century time period of Emperor Yang Di. She had been mentioned in the history of China even before. So this character of Mulan, a young woman, pretty young woman, but also very brave, that she could join all men's army as she did and fought very successfully, and that would make her family proud of her. So that's how, and now these days, a lot of Chinese feminists, they just love her. So Emperor Yang Di, as Hua Mulan, a great woman as she was, he wanted her to be his concubine. And Hua Mulan, she refused to become the concubine of Emperor Yang Di. And just because she refused, she committed suicide, because there was no way for any person, man or woman, to refuse the order of any emperor, and especially Emperor Yang Di. And so she committed suicide because there was not going to be life, in disobedience for her to live her life in the disobedience of the emperor. Why she committed suicide? Couple of, legends. Number one, she already had, sort of a boyfriend or husband or someone in her life, a lover. She had, and so she did not want to leave that person. Yeah, makes sense. Another thing was, she was much more of a military person than a concubine in the harem. So she did not want to live in the confinement of the harem, in the confinement of the home of the emperor, where she could never be seen by anybody else except these eunuchs, these castrated, officers who took care of them. Their needs were fulfilled and everything was taken care of by the eunuchs. But that would be the whole world inside the compound of the palace. And she was not a woman like that would live there. She wanted her freedom. She wanted to be out there, much more out, as she had fought in different wars. So that's why she did not want to marry him or be concubine of him and stay inside home. So because of her, very outgoing military nature, much more like a military officer rather than a concubine of an emperor. So that's why she refused, and that because she could not live, in the disobedience of the emperor, she committed suicide. It's a great legend that people are very, in China, especially young women, are very proud of her. Let's see further. Emperor Yang Di, he got himself into big problems. These 4 big disastrous campaigns that he launched against Goguryeo. It is from this Goryeo or Goguryeo term that we get the English term Korea. So he invaded Korea 4 times, and each time his army was defeated. Now, this was a huge big army that he had conscripted or drafted and mobilized a large number of soldiers, again 4 times. And for that, he ruined, the financial and the manual resources of China. In each campaign, the Chinese were beaten back by the Koreans, not just only by the Korean army, but also by the timing was very wrong for him to invade. 2 times, the first 2 times that he invaded Korea, that was the wrong time. He invaded Korea just somewhere around October, end of October, and by the time they reached, deep inside Korea, it was already November, December, and they could not even get out of it because of the heavy snow. So that, nature in fact defeated him. Another time that he invaded Korea, he did not have, of course, nobody could have a perfect knowledge of the ocean, Pacific Ocean. So there were typhoons. And this would not be the first time again. Japan would be saved from typhoon, by typhoon from the invasions of the Mongols. So this time some typhoon came to help the Koreans against the Chinese, and then they tried their best to reach to the shores of Korea. And anytime they did, the Koreans were there, to slaughter them. And that's how he lost a huge, big number. More than 1 million soldiers got lost. Let's see. Sui army lost more than 1 million soldiers and as well as sailors, and that was a big, loss. That demoralized the army, and the army revolted against him. Some of them, they won't come back, they were defeated by the Koreans. And as you might know, in the Chinese tradition, the defeated army rarely came back. They just, vanished, because they knew if they went back, they would be killed by the emperor. So some of these soldiers, they did not come back, and they joined hands with other Mongols, and then they would come and loot China or invade China. One rebel general, he strangled Yang Di in his last years, because there were too many uprising against him, and especially uprising by the army. He had ruined every resource that there was in China, or his father had made for China, and he had already emptied, the treasury, and that's how he lost his life. But before losing his life, he lost a lot of power, and with him would be the end of the Sui dynasty almost. So he was strangled by a rebel general, and that tells you, that how weak he must have been at that time, when a general would have the courage to come and, kill him. All right, let's see further. He was succeeded by his grandson, Gongdi. But again, this grandson, Gongdi, he was just a puppet, that the army brought, the general brought to the forefront just for a show. And then the general, told the boy, you're not going to be any more king, because the emperorship or the kingship is very difficult job. So, but that was, the good thing was that the boy was let, to live. He wasn't killed or murdered, or his family was not murdered. So the general was kind enough to the boy to allow him to live. So let's see further what happened. So the grandson, he was removed, Gongdi was removed. He ruled for 1 year, a boy, but did not, the dynasty would come to an end. All right, Emperor Gongdi. The third and the last Sui emperor, as I said, he was a boy, he was a child, and a powerful governor, Yuan. He cared for the child emperor. He would take care of him. He would, the Yuan, he was the power, the governor. He was also, a military commander. So he would be the power behind the child when the child was sitting as an emperor on the throne. Yuan, he defeated other contenders. There were other, concubines of Yongdi, and they wanted to bring their sons, on the throne to be the emperors. And Yuan, he protected Gongdi as an emperor for a year because he wanted to defeat all these contenders and get rid of them, which he did. And he founded his own dynasty, the Tang Dynasty. So in a way, he might be looked at, some people can say that he was a usurper. Yes, he was a usurper, but then, he also belonged to the same Sui family. And that's how, the continuation of the Sui into the Tang and the rise of a new dynasty started when Yuan, he made his own dynasty, and he himself became the emperor. Let's see. He crowned himself as Emperor Gaozu. I'm not bringing in a lot of these names in it. Keep in mind that one person, he would have several names. One would be the, the king name. When he becomes an emperor, somebody becomes an emperor, he would take an imperial name. And so his previous name would be forgotten almost. But in his family, some people would refer to him by his pre-emperorship name, by his given name, the name that was given to him. Then there would be the imperial name when he becomes the emperor. And sometimes a lot of emperors, they got another name after he died. So he would be known for whatever he did, and that would go like in history with him, that this emperor did this thing, good or bad. So he would be known for the age, the character of the age that he lived and he ruled. So the characteristics of each age would also give him his name posthumously, that is after his death. So Li Yuan, he became emperor. Gaozu, he founded the Tang Dynasty, as I said, and he would become the first emperor of the Tang Dynasty. Let's see. So the beginning of the Tang Dynasty in about 618 AD with Emperor Gaozu, Li Yuan, the one who took care of the Sui Dynasty child, and he became the first Tang emperor. Very powerful person, because he had the previous experience of being the military commander as well as a provincial governor in China, so he knew how to rule. All right. He removed imperial capital from Luoyang to Chang'an, and somebody would move it back from Chang'an to Luoyang as it suited the needs of the person who was living and ruling. He brought more Confucian scholar and bureaucracy. He himself was sort of a mixed person, mixed in the sense he had Confucianism that he liked. He also liked Taoism. He also liked, Buddhism. So he brought more Confucian scholar in the bureaucracy, which was good for the Confucian people, which was good for the state. He built Buddhist monasteries. As I said, he also promoted Buddhism in China. Whether he converted to Buddhism or not, that did not matter. But because he, built Buddhist monasteries, paid the Buddhist monks, so that was good for Buddhism, and he wanted Buddhism to spread in China. And the reason for that was why some of these Chinese emperors, would promote this outside religion, Buddhism. As you might know, Buddhism was it started in India. Buddha, he was not a Chinese person, he was a Hindu Indian person. And then from India, Eastern India, it moved to Western India and modern day Pakistan and Afghanistan, where you have so many Buddhist relics and remains. And from there, it moved into Central Asia, and then from Central Asia into China. Now, why in China some of these emperors would promote Buddhism? Well, one reason was Buddhism promoted peace. Buddhism asked people to stay loyal to the emperor and not to rise against the emperor no matter what. So that was good for the emperor and for the people to stay in peace, and that's why so many emperors, they adopted Buddhism. Just like in India, very powerful emperors like Ashoka, he adopted Buddhism because he believed that it kept people in peace and attached to the emperor, and the emperor would also spend money on Buddhist monasteries. He would also give money to the Buddhist monks, and even he would let these Buddhist monasteries and monks to raise their own taxes, on the merchants. As the merchants would go, these Buddhist monasteries would serve their needs, food, water, etc. And that's how the merchant would leave some money there, charities or whatever, with the Buddhist monks, and that's how they would get rich, and everybody would be happy. So that's how Emperor Gaozu adopted Buddhism, not as a state philosophy, but to spread peace in the country. Let's see. He also restored peace and prosperity, of course, not just only through Buddhism, but also through a lot of hard work, bringing Confucian scholars in the government and focusing also on agriculture. He removed taxes and draft, which was previously in the Sui dynasty. And so people did not like taxes anywhere. They don't like taxes, they don't like draft. And the Sui dynasty imposed, and he removed. So that naturally made Emperor Gaozu a very popular emperor, and ruled for a long time till his end. Okay. He also gave powerful position to aristocrats in the council of state that he created. Aristocrats meaning landlords, big landlords, that he needed their help. So he brought them in a council of state that he created, in which people would come and consult. They would give him advice. These are big aristocratic families, leaders. They would give him advice in the council and he would listen to them. So that was, in a way, like he increased their social, economic, and political status in the country, these aristocrats. He also created 6 ministries, divided his bureaucracy into 6 ministries: personnel, like administration; the military, of course, very important; revenue, very important, another ministry department; public works, that would take care of the canal, the Great Wall of China, the roads; justice, very important; and also the rights, the perfect rights, how the king should perform the Confucian rights. So personnel, military, revenue, public works, justice, and rights. Not in the same order, but it seemed to be like this was the most important order for them: the personnel and the military and the revenue, the most important, the first 3 one. So these 6 ministry was also given to the aristocratic people as well as to the Confucian scholars. He also, he was later on replaced by his son, Li Shimin. And Shimin, in fact, he had been asking for a long time to remove that, child emperor and become the emperor. Li Shimin, he himself was very ambitious person. Later on, Gaozu really did not like him, his ambitious nature, and because, too much ambition, especially to those people who were Confucian people, they did not like. And so Gaozu, he was a Confucian type of a person, turned also to Buddhism, so you could call him Buddhist also. He did not like the too much ambitious nature of his son, Li Shimin, and Li Shimin would show his ambitious nature, how he would deal with his brothers and other people in the family. So let's see. Li Shimin would later on become king, and he would be known as Taizong after the death of his father. So that's how he would adopt the imperial name Taizong. He became the 2nd Tang emperor after his father, who was the founder of the Tang dynasty. He was also given this title Heavenly Khan, and that's why I'm saying don't confuse him with me being Khan. Heavenly Khan, Khan is a Mongol terminology that the Turks adopted and the people in China adopted and the people of India adopted, and it literally meant lord or king or a high position person. He was given this title Heavenly Khan by Mongols that came from the West, and they met him. They liked him, and so they believed that he was a great person. So that's why they would refer to him as Heavenly Khan. He also killed his 2 scheming brothers. Well, he was the most scheming person, very ambitious person. The throne really did not belong to him. His father did not, want him to succeed. He wanted his other 2 brothers to succeed one after another. But as I said, he was a very ambitious person. So as his father weakened, his father, abdicated in his favor, and then he went after his contending brothers who wanted the throne, and he had a justification to kill them. From his point of view, they had tried to kill him. So he went first and killed them, or he had the information, the spies, telling him that they were just about to kill him, and so that's why he went and killed them. So he killed his own 2 brothers to get to the throne, and that's how he became the great, emperor, Taizong, the 2nd emperor of the Tang dynasty. Let's see what he did. Emperor Taizong, he restructured land ownership, which means he took land from, the high landlords, from the big landlords, and gave those lands to the poor peasants. So in a way, it was good for the poor people, but that infuriated, the big landlords, because he took lands from them. He also encouraged the manufacture of porcelain and the silk industries, which was good because he was not only, in his mind, he was not only focusing on agriculture, but also on other industrial items like porcelain and the silk. So that was good. He controlled the Mongol tribes, again, through marriages and through different devices that we would see. He also protected trade with the West. So the controlling of the Mongols, not only for the defense purposes, but also for trade and business with the West. Keep in mind, you might remember the Silk Road. That Silk Road still, lived or continued to be working for China. Whenever the Mongols were in power, and whenever the Chinese went down, whenever the Mongols came to dominate the Chinese, that was the time that the Silk Road would go into disuse or into misuse. So with him coming to power, he made sure that the connection with the West was strong, and the trade and the business went on the Silk Road. So that's how he had to bribe the Mongols. Sometimes he had to go and invade them, to control them. And that the reason was to keep the Silk Road open for the Chinese goods to go from China into the West Central Asia, India, Persia, and even beyond that into Europe, and keep the other people from that side coming to China. So that's how, Silk Road worked after controlling the Mongols in China. Let's see. Also, Emperor Taizong, he perfected the civil service exam because he wanted the great civil servants who knew everything. And that's how he, the civil service, this was a Confucian invention. There were so many Confucian scholars, and it became a problem how he could select the best Confucian scholar for that one position that he had in the Council of State. Or he wanted to, bring someone to head the revenue department or the public works or the military or the rights department. So he had to pick the best person, and there were so many of them. So that's how the Confucians themselves, they invented the exam system. And now that you suffer from the midterm and the final exam and all these different exams, that people suffer, they can, I think, blame it on the Confucian scholars of China and the Chinese. They invented the exam system because there were so many educated people, and it became difficult for the emperor whom to pick. So they had to give them exam and test them how much they knew about the history, about the geography, about the culture, of course, mostly of China, not of Rome or not of Africa or not of India, but still that was great because they knew so much of China. They had a good, knowledge of China, and on the basis of that knowledge of China, they would be recruited. Some of these exams were really the nightmare of the Confucian scholars. Even though they prepared for years, yet they could fail it, and because tough competition, and if they failed it, they would quit everything. Some of them would become like sadhus or turn to temples, become, monks. This was very devastating for someone to fail the exam, and the shame that came with it, that was on top of it. So he perfected the civil service exam. Emperor Taizong, let's see further, he also allowed criticism of his policies, a unique thing on part of Emperor Taizong, that he even asked some friends that he had recruited in the service to criticize him, tell him what were the policies that they did not like. What was it that was going wrong in the kingdom? So that self type of a criticism and letting other people to criticize his policy, that was wonderful. Not many kings you would see there neither in China nor anywhere else. However, he also unsuccessfully invaded Korea, and for that he had to pay. He also faced peasant revolts because he imposed taxes to pay for these invasions against Korea or on Korea, and that slowly and gradually made him, unpopular with the people because they did not like these invasions on Korea, or they did not want to pay with the taxes and the free labor that he demanded. Also, inside the palace, there were a lot of troubles, intrigues going on, and so those trouble and those intrigues inside the palace also ruined his chances for ruling for too long. So these invasions and internal intrigues, unfortunately, weakened his rule of the Emperor Taizong, and he would pay for that. Let's see. So, one lady, an empress, later on she would become Empress, Wudi, she was a concubine. She was a concubine, and so she came to power in a very intriguing way. She is considered to be the only empress that ruled in her right, and that's how Chinese refer to her as the empress, the only woman who ruled China. There were other women in China who did rule in a sense that they had power, because they were either the queens of the emperors or the daughters of the emperor, but she herself ruled because she sat for some time on the throne without having any facade in front of her, or without having another son or another nephew, which she brought. So she was sort of a kingmaker. She would bring her sons and nephews to the throne, but later on she removed them all and herself ruled as an emperor. And boy, the Confucian scholars, they hated her. They did not like any woman to become a ruler of China, because they were very male-dominated, society and people. So Wudi, she became the empress of China, and she ruled in her own right. So that's why she is referred to Empress of China. Let's see further. Wudi, she was in fact the concubine of father Emperor Taizong, but his son Gaozong also wanted her. So she was first the concubine of Emperor Taizong, but his son wanted her, and so she became the concubine of son Emperor Gaozong. On the death of Emperor Gaozong, then she enthroned and dethroned her sons and nephews, and she became virtually, the ruler of China. So she had these minor sons or even adult sons that she brought them on the throne of China. They would be the kings, and she would be the power behind the throne or behind the kings. And later on, she just removed them and herself started ruling China. She also moved the capital to Luoyang to be where she felt, safe. Also, Wudi, she was known for beauty. She had, a sort of charming personality, and that's why, the son wanted her now. She was removed from power at the age of 80 in 705 AD. She became too old to rule, and now, somebody came and removed her, and then the Tang Dynasty was restored. When I said the Tang Dynasty was restored, it meant that she was not a Tang person. She was from Zhao Dynasty, the great celebrated dynasty that ruled forever, like for 400 years. So she gave this, this thing, telling people that she was Zhao, and so she started acting like a Zhao empress during the Tang time. Her children, all of them were Tang. They belonged to the Tang family, but she said that she belonged to the Zhao family, and that's why in Chinese history, her rule, although for limited time, is referred to as, the Zhao interlude or the Zhao rule, but she was later on removed, and so in Chinese history, she is not referred to as Zhao as she used herself, but the historian would refer to her as the Tang Empress. All right, let's see further. So she was removed, and her nephew, in the sense that he was the son of her cousin, Emperor Xuanzong. X is pronounced like TS, Swan or Zhuang Zon. So not X1 or, they pronounce X as like TS, Shuang Zon. And so he ruled for a long time. He came to the throne as a young man. He ruled for a long time. And he also, as I said, he was related to Empress Wudi. So whether that was good for him or not, but he would also have problems. He was the 6th Tang emperor, Xuanzong. He moved capital back to Chang'an because she had moved it to Luoyang. And he also adopted what is called the equal field system, which meant that he gave people lands in equal amount, which meant that he would levy or impose taxes upon people equally. So that's how nobody would complain. He gave people equal amount of land, equal pieces of land, and on those equal pieces of land, he had to impose equal amount of taxes. So that's how, in a way it worked. People did not feel like discriminated, number one. They did not feel like being cheated out of taxes more than somebody else. They did not pay more than somebody else. So that's how the equal field system worked for some time. Although nothing is perfect, no system is perfect, and all systems become corrupt, after some time, and that's what happened also to the equal field system. Now, speaking of equal field system, it was not only used in China. Later on, the same thing would be used in Korea and Japan, and not because of China, but just because of its natural system, a just system in the equality. It was also used in different parts of the Middle East as well as in India and Europe. So that's why it's called equal field system, when land was divided equally among a number of people, and these people had to pay taxes equally, so nobody felt cheated or overtaxed. All right, let's see further. He had also Emperor Songzong had to deal with the barbarians, and he came up with a lot of devices to deal with the barbarians. One was diplomacy. Another one was to divide and rule. Sometimes he would just come up with good defenses, and sometimes he would just invade them, offense. And other time he would use the tribute. This would come later on also in Chinese history. Tribute is that system in which the king would allow northern people or western people, that is Mongol or Turkish people, to come to China and do business with China. But when they would come to China, they would bring their embassies or their merchant groups. Then when they would come to China, they would have to bring some presents or gifts, or other times taxes from outside to the emperor of China. And that would show like they were subordinate to the emperor of China. That's how they showed subordination. And when they would leave China, the emperor of China would give them more than what they gave him. So that's how it worked, the tribute system. He would repay them more money or more luxurious items, silk and jade, or whatever. At that time there was precious items that he would give them back, in return for being his good subordinate to him. So that's how the tribute system worked. So he invited Mongol leaders, come do business with us. We would give you this and that's sometime it would work sometime. But Mongol, they never stopped invading China. And these barbarians, not only just Mongols, but also Turkish people, they would invade again and again China, and the Chinese would suffer a lot from these foreign invasions. All right. At his later age, Emperor Songzong, he got into moral corruption. As he grew older, moral corruption, he took his son's concubine, Yuan Guifei. Guifei, very beautiful woman. Just because he took his son's concubine, Confucian scholar did not like him. They thought that was just too much. He ignored defense of the kingdom. This Yang Guifei, he was just under, Songzong was under the charm of Yang Guifei. There are stories when she would bath, her servants, female servants, they would be dumbstruck by her beauty. They couldn't watch her taking the bath. So beautiful she was, the legend says, or could be the reality, who knows. So he took his son's concubine, Yang Gufei, and then he ignored the defense of the kingdom, and he just became too much, with her. Foreign invasions increased because, Mongols and other people at the gate, they found out that the king was just too busy. He ignored the defenses, he ignored agriculture, and so that's how foreign invasions increased. The Chinese borders contracted, which means that the previous dynasties and the previous kings had taken the border to Mongolia in the north, to Korea in the northeast, to Tibet in the southwest, to Annam, that is Vietnam, to further south. But these people, they rolled up the Chinese empire as much as they could. That is, they got out of the Chinese imperial subordination or overlordship. And so they would not send any taxes, any tribute. They would not listen to any Chinese emperor, and that was Xuanzong at his time. So that is what's called the contraction of the Chinese borders. When there is a strong person, capable person having a lot of army, a lot of resources, then he would of course expand the borders. And that you would see in Chinese history a lot, the expansion of the borders, and then the contraction of the borders. And in this time happened the contraction of the borders under Emperor Xuanzong. Let's see further. Some of these invasions. In 751 AD, Arabs, they defeated Chinese army in Samarkand, which is in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan. By this time, the Arab had reached to the western frontiers of China. And the Chinese, they had been fighting, of course, in the west of their country against other Turks and other Mongols. But this time they had to fight against the Arabs, and the Arab army defeated the Chinese army. Now, some people believe that at this time the Chinese army was commandeered, or it was led by a Korean officer, military officer. And so there was not a good understanding between this Korean officer and the Chinese people at the base of the army, and that's how the confusion led to the victory of the Arabs. Whatever the case may be, the Arabs, they were very powerful people, great warriors, and so most probably I believe and I subscribe to the theory that the Arabs had already bought the loyalty of the Mongol people. So the Arabs had come from Arabia. They had limited forces. They could not fight, the 1 million, so to speak, Chinese army. They could not do that. But they did it because they joined hands with the Mongols, those Mongols who did not want the Chinese rule, or the Turkish people in the West who did not want to be ruled by the Chinese. So they joined hands with the Arabs, and the two together defeated the Chinese army. And of course, the Arabs, some of them, they stayed behind in Central Asia, that is Western China, and they spread Islam. After the war was over, they spread Islam, and that's why even today, west of China, and especially the western province in China, Xinjiang or Xinjiang, it is completely Islamic, Muslims. And that's why in the west of China, a lot of Chinese are Muslim, and that's the time in the 8th century, mid-8th century, when the Arabs brought Islam to China. All right, let's see further what other invasion came upon China. After the Arab invasion, then came another invasion, the greatest of all times, and that was in 755 AD. An Lushan, a great leader of the Sogdian people. Sogdania, that is a place, basically these were Persian people mixed up with Turkish and Mongols, and they had their Sogdians, they had their own empire in Central Asia, very close to Western China. And so under this great leadership of a person by the name An Lushan, a Sogdian leader, these people, the Sogdian, they came and defeated the Chinese army. They went so far deep into China that even they captured the two capitals, Luoyang and Chang'an. Think about it, for them to come all the way from west, entering China into the center and eastern plains of China where Luoyang and Chang'an were. And so they seized these two capitals, and that of course would definitely, weakened the Tang dynasty. Now, The emperor, when his capital was seized by Anlushan, Emperor Shuangzong with his consort or concubine Yang Gufei, they fled, and later they were both killed. The emperor as well as his concubine Yang Gufei, they were killed, and somebody else, restored the Tang dynasty after him. All right. The Tang dynasty again in 756 was restored. The Tang dynasty, it ruled, its rule continued, but in a very diminished way. It did not have the power that it used to have. So after the Anlushan revolts and his invasion that ruined peace and prosperity of China, that was so much characteristic of the Tang dynasty. People lived in peace and prosperity. They had a lot of food, they had a lot of industry, commerce, and business going on. But because of the Sogdian invasion, all that was disrupted. Some scholars believed that people lost the population, big loss of population for China. The population after this invasion dropped from 53 million to 17 million. That is less than in about 80 or 70 years, in less than 1 century. This is a big drop of population. I read somewhere close to between 30 to 35 million people were killed during these invasions, and later on the problems that created by these invasions, lack of agriculture. Nobody was free to do agriculture, and then inside China itself, the trouble between different, rising powers killed a lot of people, and that was a big loss that China would, of course, recover, but it took Chinese to recover. It took Chinese time to recover from the Anlushan invasions, the Sogdian invasion on China in mid-8th century. Let's see further. The military commanders after Anlushan, they became more powerful. The provincial governors, and the military commander, they defied the emperor's central authority. And by about 850 AD, local rulers, they carved China into petty kingdoms. And this is again, the same old thing. History repeating itself in China. When the strong dynasty was coming to its end, Chinese local rulers, they came to power, and they asserted more and more power, especially in their own local areas, and they became petty kings, and that was not good for China. So China living between disunity and unity, and somebody had to come and unite them all. All right, in 907 AD, finally the Tang dynasty collapsed. Because of these foreign invasion and internal disruptions and disunity and too many people coming to power that ruined the Tang dynasty, it collapsed. However, the culture of the Tang dynasty continued. After the 10th century onward, it continued, and since it ruled for a long time, the Tang dynasty, whatever it established as the standard of the culture, civilization, standard of writing, different inventions in agriculture and industrial, skills, those were further, they continued and perfected by different people. So let's talk about a little bit of the Tang culture. Even after the Tang dynasty, there was the same emphasis on education. It was not because of the Tang, it was because of Confucianism, but Tang subscribed more to Confucianism as well as Buddhism. That's why Tang dynasty had more educated people. Some of these great people, Confucian scholars, they started writing political, military, institutional histories, and a lot of that was written during the Tang dynasty because there were a lot of scholars, a lot of writers. And these people, they were in office. While they were in office, they would write history about the current history of their own time and about the previous people. And keep in mind, most of the time, history was used as a great lesson. So that's how they were writing history with a sense of learning something from the past. And hence, the Tang dynasty, it ruled for a long time and produced a lot of historical work. So some historical work, political, some military, some institutional and that was great, and that's how we know more about the Tang culture. Okay, some officials, they turned to poetry and painting for pleasure in leisure time when they were free. They would do that. Lipo, a great poet of the Tang Dynasty. Lipo and also another one, Du Fu, that we would see him in a minute. First, Lipo, he is a sort of poet that would make you sad because he wanted the previous great generation back again, but nothing was coming back again. The Tang Dynasty was losing power. So he is very much, he has this nostalgia about the past, and something is lost. And so that's how he gives you a lot of sad poetry. Even if he, is talking about wine, he's talking about beautiful things, and yet in the presence of all this fun and beauty, something is missing. And that is the grandeur of China that he was missing. So that is, in a way, Lipo, and very gusto type of a person. He was very extemporaneous. With the extempore, he would, cuff out poetry like that. Whenever he was surrounded by his friend, they would ask him, to say something, and whatever he said was beautiful poetry, but always with a sense of history, with a sense of loss, with a sense of how great China is, how beautiful China is, and how still we have all these problems. That type of a sense of history filled the poetry of Lipo. Another wonderful and great poet of the Tang Dynasty, Du Fu. He was much more into like this culture of the wine culture. Much more, he was a scholar, both were scholars, Du Fu as well as Lipo, both were scholars, and they were given position in the state, they enjoyed good life. But here, Du Fu, he's much more like for pleasure, and he's not nostalgic about anything. He is a very forward-looking poet. Even in the midst of warfare, he sees the brighter side in the dark ages that were turning more and more on the Tang Dynasty. So that's the big difference between the two. Both, have beautiful poetry, and both would grab your attention immediately. You would love to listen to them. Maybe you can read, some of the section that you have in your book or, on the internet, and both are translated widely, especially in English language. Let's see further. The Tang culture, it was very cosmopolitan culture. Back to the presentation, very cosmopolitan culture, very tolerant culture of other people, other faiths. It was during the Tang Dynasty that you see many more contacts with the Turkish people in the West, with the people of India, with Persia, Sogdiana, and Arabia. And of course, as these people came to China, they gave something to China. They brought something to China, their arts, their philosophies, their religions. It was during the Tang Dynasty that Buddhism became a major religion in China. And it was good for the Tang Dynasty because it preached, peace to the people and wanted to have a good relationship. Buddhism wanted to have a good relationship between the people and the emperor. So that's why it became a major religion in China during the Tang Dynasty. Also, during the Tang Dynasty, Nestorian brand of Christianity entered China, and later on Islam also came to China, and both of them, they came from the Middle East. Christianity by that time, very popular religion, in the Middle East. Islam, of course, replaced, Christianity in the Middle East, but it was from the Middle East that this Nestorian Christianity, as well as Islam, came to the Middle East. All right. This is Tang, China, in the pink or red color. Here is Korea. These are the Mongols, the Turkish people of Central Asia, but mixed with the Mongols. Here is Tibet, India, Persia, and Arabia. And Tang China opened China. The Tang Dynasty opened China to all these people, and they came to China as the Chinese went to these different places. more scholars of the Tang China wrote about other nations, other people, especially Central Asia and the Middle East. So that knowledge, and at the same time, Christians were coming to Tang China, the Muslims were coming to Tang China, and Buddhism was spreading in Tang China, and that's why the knowledge of the Chinese people increased by many folds about the rest of the world. So that was, in a way, good for the Chinese people. Their knowledge expanded. They came to know about other nations, their other belief systems, and it was good also economically for the Chinese people to do business with other nations, as the other nations also prospered by doing business with China. So that's sort of the end of the Tang culture. However, Tang culture would continue under different dynasties, and it would be further improved on, but keep in mind the same emphasis on education, the same emphasis on peace, prosperity, and now much more commerce and trade and business that the Chinese would do with the rest of the world. So that was the Tang China. In conclusion, let's see what we did. We talked about the end of the three kingdoms and how the end of the three kingdoms led to the unification by the Sui dynasty, and how the Sui dynasty got into wars against Korea that ruined everything for the Sui dynasty and lost its power. And then it was the Sui dynasty general who, protected this child from other people, and then removed the child emperor of the Sui dynasty, and himself became an emperor and started the Tang dynasty. So that was the rise of the Tang dynasty. But again, foreign invasion, barbarian invasion coming from Mongolia, coming from west, from the Turkish Mongol people. And still, even if the Tang dynasty collapsed in 905 AD, still the Tang culture continued. And as I said, it would go on. Till this day, whatever the Tang established in terms of Confucianism, this emphasis, especially this emphasis on education and much more production, industrial production of the Chinese products, that would go on as we see today. And thank you very much. And next time we will talk about something else about China. Aloha.